It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it's time for another First Thoughts and Initial Impressions Epic 7 video. This one is actually going to be fairly packed as we have a lot of things to talk about, as there was so much announced this morning. 7 new characters. Although the primary focus of this video will be on the 5-star hero Beehoo, as well as the Moonlight 4-star hero Peacemaker Furious. We will briefly touch on the other 5 heroes, which are new 3 stars, and talk about which ones I think are worth holding on to, especially if they end up getting a specialty change. I also want to talk about the 2 new exclusive equipments that were shown, as well as the hotfix to Death Dealer Ray. If you enjoy this style of content, as always, please consider leaving me a like or subscribing to the channel if you really enjoy it. It does help me out here a ton. And with the intro out of the way, as always, let's take a look at Beehoo's S3 before we talk about him.
You huddled masses, it's time to rise up. May this hidden bounty light within your hearts. If you're afraid, you can surrender.
Funny enough, our hot husbando Beehoo here is actually voiced by a handsome gentleman himself in Ritesh Rajan, who also, funnily enough, is the voice of Ken from the Barbie franchise, at least for the last couple of years for those animated features. So yeah, that's a pretty apt casting, I would say. Moving on to Beehoo's stats, he is a Fire Ranger of the Capricorn zodiac symbol. He shares a stat line with Flan, Bellona, Elfelt Valentine, and Riza Hawkeye. Taking a closer look at his stats, his attack here, it says, is 1,203, but that is misleading. It is actually 1,003. It is 200 higher thanks to his S2 passive Flamekeeper. His health is 5,704. Speed is 115, which is actually quite good, and we'll talk about that in a second. Defense is 702, but that is, again, also misleading. It is actually 585. It is increased due to his S2 passive Flamekeeper. Critical hit chance is 15%. Critical hit damage is 150%. Dual attack chance is 3%. And effectiveness is 30%. Of course, no effect resistance. So, health is fairly good for a Ranger. Normally, it's pretty low. Defense is also quite solid, especially because you're going to be getting a bit more thanks to his S2 passive. So, he's actually pretty tanky for a Ranger. He can actually take a hit. I think the stat that most people are going to be focusing on this character is the speed value, which is 115, which is, again, actually quite good. A lot of people are going to think it's not super good because this character doesn't outspeed Zio. Nothing really does. It doesn't outspeed Conqueror Lilius. It doesn't outspeed Leica. There's a lot of things that Beehoo doesn't outspeed. But if the best players in the game can get Flan over 300 speed, then you could absolutely get Beehoo over 300 speed because he has the same stats as Flan. On top of that, 115 is still quite good. 114 is the speed of a character like Faithless Litica, and no one is out here accusing Faithless Litica of being a slow character. And Beehoo doesn't really need to stress too much about a lot of his stats, whereas like Faithless Litica might need critical hit chance. We'll talk about it in a second. Beehoo really only needs like some effectiveness and bulk. Like he's pretty much in the same boat as Flan. He really doesn't need a lot. So I think in the coming weeks to months, a lot of people are going to be focusing on Beehoo's speed or supposed lack thereof. But I'm here to tell you, I think Beehoo is actually pretty fast and could potentially be a pretty solid opener, especially because he is a Ranger, so he has Guiding Light. Guiding Light has proven to be incredibly good this past season in World Arena, and until they address it, Rangers are going to feel incredibly broken. So having a Ranger that is slightly faster than Faithless Litica on Guiding Light inherently means the character is probably going to be quite good, assuming that the kit is actually something substantial. Moving on to Beehoo's skills here, we have his S3 Feast of Radiance. You acquire 3 souls upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Malagora. It is a non-attack skill that dispels 2 buffs from all enemies and makes them unable to be buffed for 2 turns, before increasing combat readiness of Beehoo himself by 50%, and increases the combat readiness of all allies except for him by 20%. This is actually a fairly good opening skill, especially because, again, this is a Ranger on Guiding Light. A lot of the openers, save for Conqueror Lilius, don't have a way to really interact with characters inside of stealth. So either Beehoo goes first and pushes his team and shuts down any potential setup because of the unbuffable, or he is going to go second, in which case he can potentially remove any setup that was incurred on the first turn, assuming it can actually be dispelled. So I think Feast of Radiance is actually fairly solid. It's not the most amazing opening skill, but it being a non-attack skill means it does have some pros versus some other things. For example, Leica has an S3 that is very powerful as an opening skill, but it is an attack skill, so it's not the best into a character like Savior Aiden, for example. Whereas Feast of Radiance does not care if Aiden is on the opposing team, but obviously would care immensely if a character like Celine was on the enemy team. So it's just variety. It is a fairly standard opener, again, at this point in Epic 7's life. I think it is good, not amazing. It does just enough for me to be like, yeah, okay, I would play that. Moving on to Beehoo's S2, it is the aforementioned passive Flamekeeper. Increases the attack and defense of Beehoo by 20 to 30% based on Malagora. When attacking, cannot trigger a critical hit. Increases burn damage suffered by enemies by 30%. This effect does not stack with other passive skills of the same name. Lot to unpack here. Burns care about having high attack, but not too much else. Like, we don't care about your critical hit damage or your critical hit chance for burns. Most characters that are burn based are not building critical hit chance or critical hit damage at all. Getting an extra 30% attack is super helpful for Beehoo because he only has about 1,000 attack, which is very low for a damage dealer. It's like slightly below average for a ranger, but compared to most other classes, it's pretty bad. Most of the mages that are burn based have around 1,200 attack. Flamekeeper basically gives you another 300 or so attack. So that means that Beehoo with Flamekeeper is basically got more attack than most of the burn characters that are actually in the game. On top of that, Beehoo makes it so that all burn damage suffered by enemies increases by 30%, which means you can actually build around this character. You can build an entire burn-based team by drafting Beehoo. You don't necessarily have to, but that's a pretty, awesome thing to have. The fact that he cannot trigger a critical hit means that if you wanted to play him on Song of the Deep Sea, which is Asaria's artifact, Summertime Asaria, you could. I don't think I would, unless you really just want to play him with Pirate Captain Flan, for example, which is not a bad idea. But that's a little bit puzzling, but it's not the end of the world because, again, you're probably not building those stats anyway. And then obviously it can't stack. I think that's just them covering their bases. Overall, really good passive in my opinion. Again, attack increase basically means Beehoo has more attack than most other burn characters, so he's going to hurt a lot more than other burn characters. And then on top of that, you're getting an increase to burn damage for your entire team. So this guy is going to do like 8, 10, maybe 12k with burns. Like it's going to be a lot. We'll have to see, but it's going to be a lot. I promise you. 1 or 2 burn stacks while Beehoo is on the field are going to you're going to really feel it. Even the tankiest characters are going to get chunked pretty seriously from just this passive. On top of that, 30% extra defense means that he's a ranger that can actually take a hit. And when you factor in something like Guiding Light on the character, he's going to be an absolute pain to get rid of. He's going to be one of the more durable rangers, which that's kind of like a rarity. Usually rangers are not that durable. The most durable ranger is pretty much one of the 2 Flans. They're pretty much like the tankiest ones, and I would not hesitate to call them supremely tanky. But Beehoo, for his speed, bracket with this passive, means he's probably going to be, again, able to take at least 2 hits most of the time. And if you're lucky, you might be able to take a third, which is a rarity because, again, most rangers, like Faithless Lytica, for example, some characters can just kill her in 1 hit based on your actual build. Rangers are not known for durability. Beehoo's S1 is going to be Scorching Flame. Attacks the enemy with flames, burning them for 1 turn. When used on the caster's turn, has a 50% chance to use Incinerate instead of Scorching Flare. Incinerate is a replacement attack that attacks the enemy with an explosion of flames and burns them for 1 turn. Even though it's not in white text here, it does still actually land a burn stack. It then detonates all burn effects inflicted on the target at the end of the turn, and this skill cannot trigger a dual attack. You can trigger Incinerate 100% of the time by spending 10 souls as Beehoo's soul burn. Fairly good S1. Synergizes obviously with the S2 because you're going to get burns and you're going to get detonates. And the fact that you are increasing not only the attack but the burn damage from the S2 means that these things are going to hurt even if you don't invest too much attack into it. If you build a really high attack Beehoo, one that's not really trying to speed contest, I think that this character is just going to do an absolute ludicrous amount of damage and is going to be really strong against characters like Lionheart Sermia, that's traditionally not that fast, or a character like Sylvan Sage Vivian, another character that doesn't really ever break the 220 speed barrier. Like Beehoo with like a bunch of attack, not trying to play for a super fast opener, can absolutely like destroy these characters with Scorching Flare and Incinerate. So I think he is a fairly powerful damage dealer if you decide to go like all in on very high attack. But even if you don't do that, again, I still think the character is quite strong. I think most people will play this character on speed hit, obviously reasonably fast. If Flan can break the 300 speed barrier, somebody out there will try to make a 300 speed Beehoo for sure. And that to me, again, seems really good because it has the ability to take turn one. And even if you don't, Guiding Light plus the fact that you have such a massive amount of bulk given to you for free from the S2 means that there's a pretty good chance that you'd be okay even with taking the turn 2 spot. And like we talked about with the S3, you have the option of being a strong opener with the CR push, but also you're content with going turn 2 because of the fact that it's a strip plus unbuffable, which means that you have like skin in the game no matter where Beehoo goes. Like he's not completely hosed if he doesn't go first, and he's still really strong even going first. And even if you build no damage and go like full tanky, annoying character, the S2 in itself, in tandem with the S1, is going to ensure that you're going to get pretty solid damage on this character, which is something I can't really say for a character like, say, like Lua, for example, is not really exceptional damage unless you land some defense breaks. Like Beehoo, I feel like is going to do solid damage almost no matter how you build them, with the upside of being able to just absolutely delete characters if you decide to go that damage-based build. The one thing that's a little bit disappointing is that Incinerate only triggers on your turn, so you can't really make those cool PvE style only counter builds like you can with the Araminthas. Like I personally play Silverblade Araminta on counter set for Nightmare Raid. You could do that on Beehoo, but it's not really the best because you just don't get the Incinerate. But that is definitely something you could do if you wanted to. So counter set with like Unity as the offset is not a bad thing necessarily. It's just not going to be as impactful as like speed hit will in a PvP setting. So I think we leave the counter builds for those of you who are just PvE enthusiasts. Overall, I think Beehoo is actually a fairly good character for the reasons I've already talked about. He's fairly good going first, fairly good going second, does decent damage if you decide to build no damage, can probably do ludicrous damage if you build a ton of damage on him. And then he has some flexibility in where you can use him. We have potential meme builds for some PvE stuff. Seems fantastic in controlled environments like Guild Wars or Arena Offense. And is probably a fairly decent character even in World Arena. Probably not a top tier character, but I think he will at least have some impact, especially with how prevalent characters like Pirate Captain Flan actually are right now. Moving on to Beehoo's artifact, it is Sphere of Inferno. After using a non-attack skill, increases the combat readiness of the caster by 10 to 20% based on artifact level, and after the next attack, burns the target for 2 turns. I think it's a fine artifact. If you don't have Guiding Light for Beehoo, this is a fairly good alternative if you happen to pull one when trying to acquire the character. It gives you essentially like a 70% CR push for Beehoo, which lets him get to his second turn much faster, and it'll be a bit more impactful, especially if you have souls to guarantee his Incinerate. So again, seems like a fairly good option. I think Guiding Light is better because Guiding Light is just broken right now, and until they find a way to either nerf it or introduce characters to address it, Guiding Light is just going to run the show for most Rangers. But I think this is a fine alternative. It's also decent for those of you who are newer that have Pirate Captain Flan but may not have been around when Summertime Assyria was around and don't actually have that artifact. It is a fairly decent option there because her S1 into S2, the CR push, that is a non-attack skill. So that could give you a potential burn because Pirate Captain Flan does detonate, correct me if I'm wrong, not only bombs, but burns on the target. So that could be something that is really useful. Not the best artifact, like I said, Spirit Inferno, but it is serviceable if you do not actually have like Guiding Light for Beehoo. And again, Flan seems like a okay home for it if you're looking for somewhere else to put it. All right, boys and girls, let's move on now to Furious, but first, obviously, his S3.
Aachen will never fall. Not on my watch. Underestimating your opponent will be your downfall. In war, winning isn't the end.
I've used this factoid in other videos in the past, but in the English dub of Epic 7, Peacemaker Furious is voiced by Mike Powers, who you can hear as not only Kayron, but as Hoochie, you know, the guy that runs the scam shop that you probably have spent a lot of Skystones into in the past. Moving on to his actual stats here, Peacemaker Furious is a 4-star Dark Ranger of the Scorpio Zodiac symbol. He has a stat line that is the same as Watcher Shuri. Taking a look at his stats, he has 970 attack, 5,935 health, 106 speed, 557 defense, 27% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 3% dual attack chance, and no effectiveness or effect resistance. Imprint release, regrettably, is effectiveness as opposed to speed like Watcher Shuri, but he does have the same imprint concentration of critical hit chance, which is very welcome for a damage dealer. Overall, not really that great of an attack score, but health is pretty good. Defense is okay. And the fact that it's just okay is a little bit maddening because, spoiler alert, this is a defense scaling hero, so I wish this was a bit higher. Lionheart Sermia, for example, has about 100 more defense than Furious. And for defense scaling characters, she's already like lower than most of her other peers. So not exactly the greatest sign. I think the best strength here on the character is probably pretty high health for a ranger, 27% critical hit chance. Those are pretty much the standouts for this actual character's stats. Before we jump into his skills, though, we have to at least talk about the elephant in the room, and that's that Peacemaker Furious is a focus character, much like Death Dealer Ray. The character has an ultimate that you cannot use until you get to 5 focus. So you're going to see me compare this character to Death Dealer Ray a lot. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the character is bad, because there's a number of market improvements in Peacemaker Furious's kit plus class that I think sets him apart from Death Dealer Ray. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be good. It just means that he doesn't have some of the same pitfalls that Death Dealer Ray had. And you'll see that here with the S2, which is set in motion. You acquire 3 focus upon use, and you also acquire 1 soul. It has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Malagora. It is a non-attack skill that increases the speed of all allies for 2 turns and grants fury to the caster for 3 turns before granting an extra turn. So, gives 3 focus, just like with Ray's S2. But it also grants an extra turn, which means that we're essentially getting 4 focus at the minimum, because assumingly after this you're going to be using the S1. So we're already a whole turn faster than Ray was, just because this gives an extra turn. It also gives a speed buff to Furious, as well as the rest of the team, meaning that we will more quickly get to that second turn, and we have a realistic clock to get to our S3 by the 3rd turn. He's also a defense scaling hero, which we'll talk more about with the S1 and S3, which means he's probably going to be as tanky or tankier than Ray as well. So that is really good. And of course, Furious would have a unique buff called Fury. Extra ER is nice, so that he can't be controlled as easily. And on top of that, it is a unique named defense increasing buff, which means that you can pair him with other defense granting heroes, say maybe like an Adventurer Raz for simplicity's sake. So even though he has less base defense than other defense scaling heroes, the fact that he has a unique named defense buff and can still get defense buff means at the end of the day, he might be hitting at or slightly above some of his other peers. We really need to see the multipliers on this character. This character is very, very dependent on the multipliers for how good they actually are. Because traditionally, defense scaling heroes are either very niche or they're pretty good in Lionheart Sermia's case, right? But again, I'm going to try to be optimistic about this. Rather than talking about the S3 first, though, let's talk about the S1, which is Corner Them. You acquire 1 focus upon use, swiftly attacks the enemy, and increases the combat readiness of Furious by 15%. When used on the caster's turn, has a 40% chance to grant an extra attack with the same skill. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's defense. You can spend 10 souls to increase the effect chance by 100%. Now, this is a really interesting thing as well, because not only do you get the speed buff from set in motion, if you manage to proc the additional, dual attack here from corner them, that gives you 5 focus on your very first rotation, which means that you get to use his S3 immediately, and we'll talk about that next, which is very, very good. And even then, you have a 2/5 chance to potentially still be in that same scenario, even if you don't want to spend the souls. Another thing that's really interesting about this character is, I know I talk about Guiding Light and how broken it is, but Unseen Observer gives you 10 souls for using a non-attack skill. So you can use Set in Motion and get the souls needed to actually soul burn corner them right away. So assuming you build this character tanky enough, you're able to build this character tanky enough and is not super slow, that's really good, right? The fact is, this character will have Black Hole Cannon on turn 2. Whereas the fastest you could use Death Dealer Ray previously was the 4th turn of the game. I already really like that. Another meme thing you can try is you can use Lydica's artifact, which I believe is Sword of Judgment. You can play that artifact on Furious and have another chance, essentially, to proc corner them. And you will get up to 3 attacks at the exact same time, which is pretty hilarious because all of them give 15% combat readiness. So you start to see, this character has a lot of, really good things going for them, whereas our boy Ray really did not. You have the extra turn, which Ray did not, right? You have the speed buff, which Ray did not. You have the burst potential to get as high, even in a meme build scenario, as 45% free CR. So realistically, you're probably going to get Black Hole Cannon off on this character. So I feel much better about this character than I did Ray, because he is a damage dealer as opposed to a niche debuff gimmick kind of thing. And he just has way better setup. Again, we'll have to see the damage, because the preview video leaves a lot to be desired, because corner them does no damage in the video, but the S3 does a lot of damage. And that is going to be what we're talking about next, which is Black Hole Cannon. You consume 5 focus to use it, and you acquire 5 souls. Attacks all enemies with a huge explosion, decreasing the combat readiness of all of them by 30%. When the caster's defense is greater than the target's defense, penetrates the target's defense, with penetration rate increasing proportional to the difference up to a maximum of 60%. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's defense. Removes 10 souls from the enemy. That's a lot to unpack. So it's an AoE attack. It pushes back the whole team. It drains 10 souls, which is obviously going to be pretty nice. And it also has defense pen rate. And we talk about that a lot on this channel. Defense pen rate is a very powerful thing to have. This is 60% at max. Traditionally, we only have had 50% at best, which is something like Lionheart Sirmia. Obviously excluding things like Straze, who's 100% to 1, and then just plain damage to the rest, right? So this is potentially a really, really powerful nuke on this character. Have to see the multipliers. But on paper, seems like it could be pretty strong. And for the reasons we talked about with S1 and S2, doesn't seem crazy difficult to set up. If the character can survive without Guiding Light, like I said, Sword of Judgment seems fairly good to set this up if you're feeling pretty lucky. Flan's Artifact, again, gives you this guaranteed soul burn if you don't want to play Ancient Book, to guarantee that you get this on turn 2. And then Guiding Light, even then, is still just good for keeping your character safe. And because Set in Motion has an extra turn built into it, there's a chance that you could use Set in Motion to guarantee that he's going to get into Guiding Light on his second turn. CR pushes on the S1, speed buff on the S2. He just has a lot of things going for him. And I think the only way this character falls flat is if the damage multipliers are so bad that we have to invest so heavily into damage that we don't have any bulk, or just the damage multipliers are just like unsalvageable no matter what. We just don't do any damage. This character is going to definitely just come down to damage multipliers. Are they good? If they're good, character is probably a lot of fun to play. Like, he looks like he's an absolute blast to play because very rarely do we get defense scaling heroes. It's an axis that very rarely we don't get to play on. They're more so in recent years we have with like the Armin rework, Arya, Lionheart, Sarmia. Like, those characters, to me at least, are incredibly fun to use. I'm hoping I actually pick up Furious because I think this character looks like a blast. And assuming that his actual, damage multipliers are good, then I think he's going to be a good character. Not necessarily like a meta character. You won't see him often. But I do think for like bruiser players, for example, this could be a really fun one to use that's not absolutely god-awful like Death Dealer Ray is. And we will talk more about Death Dealer Ray after we talk about the new 3 stars in the next section. So like I said in the introduction here, we are also going to go very quickly over the new 3 stars, and I'm going to talk about some of the highlights of them so we can, if they get a specialty change in the future, you can kind of know what to expect from them. Are they going to be potentially good? What their niche might be, things like that. Just a real quick overview of these, not super in-depth. First one is the red one. This is Junie. This is Yulha's assistant. S1 is a Dispel, which is okay, not great. S2 solidifies her as a fighting spirit character, gives some damage reduction, like a damage share passive with someone else on her team. So she could be a potential like protector, like big bruiser. We don't really know the stats. At least I have not been able to locate the stats because the video presenting these characters doesn't show their base stats. So I don't know how fast she is, things like that. Hopefully she is fairly fast, not super slow, because the S3 is not only a pretty strong AoE debuff because it defense breaks and also unhealables the whole enemy team, but it also is a pseudo cleanse. So if this character gets like some kind of like debuff immunity, like a Mediator Koeric or like a Designer Lilibet, then this is definitely a character to look out for sure, just because she has a similar S3 to Designer Lilibet. So yeah, this is definitely one you're going to want to hold on to a couple of copies of. Next up is Talus. This is the character that I was most excited to get out of these new NPCs because he radiates that like big Goku or like Ryu from Street Fighter energy. Like, he's just a brawler. I'm a big fan of brawler characters, as you know, really like Hua Yong. So this is like super right up my alley. S1 is a provoke for 60%, which is nice. S2 is actually really cool. The wording says that it is a maximum of 40%, but he has an innate 30% chance to counterattack. I don't know if that means it skills up to 40 and then counter set makes it 70, or if you put counter set on it, it caps at 40 because they realize 70% counter would be absolutely ridiculous. Either way, I really love this. If he counters, or when he just uses an attack in general, he will get 100% CR, which is basically like it becomes his turn, or he takes an extra turn and resets the cooldown of his S3. His S3 is not only a defense buff to make him tankier, but also a pretty good attack, it looks like, if the target is actually provoked. Hopefully the damage increase is fairly substantial. Character is a really cool design, and I would love for this character to get an actual specialty change because, man, like, having a character with just a crazy high counter rate that it provokes and punishes characters that are provoked, like, this is like a bruiser player's dream, this character. It's super, super cool. Next up is Lilka with the wrong icon. But if you don't remember, this is Peira's like secretary or helper. She's like the little girl with the ears. So yeah, again, she's related to Peira. S1 is a defense break with a soul burn to increase the chance. S2 is a CR push for herself as well as your highest attack ally. And if that ally has less than 30% CR, you also get an additional like 50% on top of that. So it's essentially almost 100% CR push for somebody that has really high attack that is at like 20% or less CR, which literally should just scream to all of you like this is a hopeless Smaquist character. So if you're looking for blue expedition units, Lilka, just based on the fact that she has a defense break and she snaps people out of fatigue, makes her excellent for that. Her S3 ace in the hole gives not only a decrease to attack and speed, also pretty good for hopeless Smaquist, but she also gives a speed increase to all allies if she's targeting a blue unit. Character is amazing in hopeless Smaquist. Might end up being the new gold standard and replacing some of the characters that are already on that team. Talia, who is Tala's sister, regrettably not super good, even though she looks kind of cool. S1 is a defense break. S2 is an immunity and barrier for herself as well as someone on the team. And then the S3 is a really cool unable to be counterattack skill with a soul burn that ignores effect resistance. But it honestly falls flat because it's only single target. It's just, dispel 2 debuffs and make them unable to be buffable. So like it's good for hyper focusing one target, but when you have characters like, Lua and stuff, it's kind of hard to like want to actually, pick a ignore effect resistance single target move when you have something like that available, or like something like Rand's Soul Burn available. Like there's like way more impactful like strips, or even like Soul Burn 20 souls like Landy can't be counterattacked. Like there's just way more impactful stuff than just singling out one person and giving them unbuffable and it can't be countered. So yeah, I feel like Talia just falls flat. I think she's probably the worst one in the cycle. Suthan, who is Arya's younger brother, I think is probably the best one that you can play right now because he seems to have really strong applications in Nightmare Raid. If you are having trouble with the one fight that requires 2 or more bleeds or 2 or more burns on each of the ads, Suthan is a pretty competent 3-star free-to-play burn character. S1 is a burn. S2 increases the damage of the burn and the likeliness that those burns will land every turn over the span of 10 turns for it to stack up, making him really, really strong in PvE. Like Belated Bloom, this S2, screams, I'm a PvE character. And then S3 is an AoE burn and unhealable. Literally screams free-to-play PvE character for those of you who are struggling with things like Nightmare Raid. So he's very, very good. Moving on to the exclusive equipments, there's one for Crow as well as one for Sharoon. Crow got 10 speed, which is obviously something I always note. That is significantly better. The problem comes in the fact that all of the abilities that are on Crow's exclusive equipment should have just been on the base character. This character feels incredibly outclassed when compared to Specialty Change Arwell, as well as Yulha. The fact that Swordstorm is a 75% provoke chance when even like common like 3 and 4 star knights are 100% provoke chance at this point is embarrassing. The fact that you wasted an exclusive equipment slot on that is embarrassing. Charge feels like a very dated move on his S2. The defense buff plus CR pushback was good then. It feels lackluster. I think most of us would probably rather have the Helag Lance on Specialty Change Arwell or like the reflect damage plus the barrier and the combat readiness push on Yulha. The speed buff is meant to help kind of alleviate that, and it's probably the one that I would play, but it's still not like super great. The one on Summon Siegfried decreases the skill cooldown on it by 2 turns if you get a kill. In my experience, my Crow is usually dead after I horse with him once, but it might be possible based on a low damage team for you to get multiple Siegfrieds off, especially if you have a Reviver, so that's a possibility. Overall, I'm not super enthusiastic about any of these. I think they all should have just been on the base kit of the character and give him something else. Like, giving him an exclusive equipment feels like a slap in the face. You should have just buffed the character. Next up is Sharoon. Got 16% effectiveness on the exclusive equipment. Not super big on this one at all. Like, that was the last thing she needed. She needed like speed or bulk or anything. Not really impressed with that one. First E is on the S2 passive, Just Trust Me. Instead of being 20% CR push, it is now 25%. That to me doesn't really change anything. I don't play Sharoon though. I do not own the character. It's one of the few characters in the game I don't own. If I'm wrong, let me know down in the comments below. But that to me does not seem like a strong exclusive equipment. The other one, Just Trust Me, increased the barrier strength by 50%. Yeah, it's just a really small increase to the barrier. It's pretty laughably bad, honestly. So that means by default, the only good exclusive equipment here is the S3, May You Perish, going from 4-turn cooldown to a 3-turn cooldown. Pretty disappointing set of exclusive equipments, to be honest with you. Like, Crow is definitely the winner because Crow is at least playable already, whereas Sharoon, I think, is a meme that's not really playable at all. But I'm not enthusiastic about any of these. These should all have just been on the actual Crow's base kit. Last thing to wrap up the video is actually the change to Death Dealer Ray here. He got a hotfix. He will get changed after maintenance. So yeah, if you haven't pulled him already and you think these changes are good, by all means pull for him. So they changed his S2, Anatomical Mutation. It now gives Pestilence to himself, whereas before it gave Pestilence to everyone other than Ray. And it also increases the combat readiness of Ray by 50%. We just got done talking about Peacemaker Furious, who got an extra turn on a similar skill. Why, oh why, could you not have made Anatomical Mutation an extra turn? It should have been an extra turn. Does this make him better? Yes. Do I think it makes him much better? Not particularly. They also changed Pestilence, which is misleading. I will read the original version of Pestilence before reading the new one. The old one was, after attacking on the target's turn, inflicts venom for 2 turns. This effect is not activated by a counter attack, dual attack, or extra attack. Pestilence cannot be dispelled. I will now read the new one. After attacking on the target's turn, inflicts venom for 2 turns. Pestilence cannot be dispelled. Did you catch the difference here? Or I should say the same. After attacking on the target's turn, Pestilence only will trigger on the target's turn, which means that the activated by a counterattack didn't matter in the first place because you are triggering a counter not on your turn. Extra attack still does not work because it's not the person who has Pestilence. If they tag in for a dual attack or an extra attack here, it's not going to matter. So the long and short of this, what I'm getting at is the change to Pestilence makes it so that a character like Alencia now gets Pestilence for the extra follow-up on Mind's Eye, the trample basically. And then a character like an injury set Bellion will also trigger Pestilence on her follow-up attack. Other than that, as far as I can tell, it's still the same. So the big change is he gets Pestilence on himself. He gets a 50% CR push. He still can't use his S3 until the 4th turn of the game. I do not have Death Dealer Ray. I have played against maybe one ever. I thought he was probably one of the worst ML5s we've ever had. He's particularly weak. I said he was cool in my review. Didn't really think he was worth pulling for. I still don't think he's worth pulling for with these hotfixes. I don't really think they do enough. They don't really help him. But of course, I have been wrong in the past. I thought that Edward Elric's changes were not actually enough to help him. And I was surprisingly surprised when he ended up being one of the best characters in the game. So let me know down in the comments below how you feel about the changes to Death Dealer Ray. Again, me personally, not a fan of him. Don't think it really does a whole heck of a lot. If I missed anything or made a mistake, as always, let me know down below as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Later now.